Welcome to another episode of Cyber Oinks, where we talk to cybersecurity leaders about what I think are fundamental cybersecurity questions. Today we have Jeff Headley. Jeff is a CTO. He's been in the tech industry for a while. I think his path was quite naturally evolved into him basically adopting CISO competencies and abilities because he led a company through 3 phases of a FedRAMP process. So he actually needed to learn a lot of the cybersecurity skill and be able to basically do cybersecurity governance for that project. Jeff, thanks so much for joining me today. How's your day so far?
Thank you so much, David. It's just been another day of talking cybersecurity already. First meeting started at 7:30 a.m. So been going at it for a bit today already.
Nice. So you're all warmed up. That's good.
Mm-hmm.
So let me maybe just for anyone watching this for the first time so that they have an idea what we're doing here today. What we're doing is this concept we call 12 questions with cyber experts. The whole idea is there's these 12 questions that are framed in a way that basically anyone, who's talking to me about this has to answer in a multiple choice format. It's either yes or no questions, or there's maybe a few more options sometimes in these questions. And the idea is, cybersecurity is always about priorities and making sure you can make a decision. I find it really interesting that there's some things that seem to be kind of like, this should be a no-brainer maybe already. We've been at this for a while, but then I was surprised to kind of realize, these are things that people that are experts for sure have totally different opinions that are sometimes contradicting. And I wanted to explore that a bit more. So that's why I put together this concept. And so we're going to have some fun with it today. What do you say, Jeff?
Sounds great. I'm ready to jump right in. Let's make some controversial topics come up and see what people think.
All right. Sounds good. So before we get into it, this is a test I always do to start with, to make sure we get the concept and then you can actually pass the question. The first question, it's a funny little question, has nothing to do with cybersecurity. If you had to pick, would you rather watch a game of lacrosse or a UFC fight?
Whoa. I'm going to go with lacrosse because I tried it briefly with some friends in college and I ended up busting a theater window on the university campus, which fortunately they did not force me to pay for, and they understood. Besides, the other guy should have just caught the ball and it would have not been.
Right. Okay, nice. Thanks. Perfect. So you get the point.
Yeah.
The test went well. So let's jump into the actual questions. First one, there's been a lot of, I would say, cultural shift around, employees and contractors being used to working from their own devices, companies accepting the culture and I guess kind of welcoming it in some way as well from an economical perspective. But the security question is how do we manage this type of environment? My question to you is, if you, as a security practitioner, if you had to pick a way that you think best fits SMBs and small and medium businesses, would you rather, or would you say the right way is to have a strong BYOD policy, or is it a policy where there's fully only managed devices, basically?
I'm going to be controversial and right on the fence for the very first topic. So I am on board for laptops. Yes, I like the laptops to be company owned, that I can shut down, disconnect from the internet, maybe block USB storage devices. But then when it comes to mobile devices like people's phones, I don't necessarily want to have purview into family photos or have them thinking that I'm spying on personal conversations. I prefer bring your own phone and maybe using a product where I have like an area, a sandbox, or whatever you want to call it, something that I can control that part of the phone. So if the employee calls up and says, I just lost my phone, all right, I can go into a product and say, wipe out corporate data off of that phone, please.
Right. Yeah. All right. You dodged the question a bit, but I like the answer. Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, for sure. Cybersecurity is, of course, anyone, who's been in this field will tell you the mantra, people, process, tech. And usually, and what I found interesting about this is usually people tell you it's all three, right? That's the whole point of the mantra. It's people, process, tech. You can't do one without the other. Now, but the interesting part of it for me is you always have to prioritize where you put your energy, right? And companies usually lag ability in some of these areas. In your experience and your way of thinking about things, which would you say companies should focus on the most or prioritize, basically? Should it be the people part, process part, and technology part?
Yeah, I'm going to go with the people. Awareness training, because so many breaches happen because somebody clicked on a link that they shouldn't have. And as well as just training for the technical staff so that you are using the tools that you have effectively and your infrastructure is configured in a secure
Right.
manner. So I'm going to
Yeah.
go with people.
Yeah. This is interesting because a lot of the times, and this is all about perspective, right? There's different ways of looking at these questions too, by the way. But a lot of the times, it's there's you have to have good tech in place, of course. But it's so common that the tech is just on the shelf. No one's really using it. It's not deployed in all systems. You have DLP that's really touching 20% of what's actually happening with the company data and that sort of thing, right? So I do agree that this is absolutely important to train people and to make sure they're actually using whatever they have in practice, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And especially with AI these days. I think companies are just kind of feeling the need to go grab AI, but are they really looking at how it's going to be used, or are they using it effectively, or how accurate
Yeah,
is it?
well, a lot of companies have already sort of hit that wall, I think. It's like anything and everything just goes into Copilot or ChatGPT, and
Right.
um, and no one knows, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, this is an MSSP question,
Okay.
or an MSP and MSSP question. Not sure how strongly opinionated you are about this one, but in my experience, there's sort of this paradox going on where clients see, they have an MSP, they see an antivirus being present on their device, they know the MSP did that, and they think, oh, well, this MSP, they're doing something in cybersecurity. So, part of what they do is cybersecurity. That's sort of how they see things in their mind, because they don't understand any of this really, right? That's why they're
Right.
hiring the MSP, right?
Right.
But then on the other side, I would say like 80-90% of the time, the MSP isn't actually providing cybersecurity services and managing cybersecurity for the company. So I guess, first of all, my first question is, do you agree with this? Is this the way you see things as well? Is that your experience as well?
Yes, I think it tends to be, or it seems like to me, it's just watching for alerts, putting some tools in place to watch for alerts, and then letting you know. But I think it should be more than that, especially for small and medium business. They don't have cybersecurity staff. They don't have the understanding. They really need some hand holding and some guidance from the MSPs. Definitely help them understand best practices. Encourage them to use password managers, multi-factor authentication, some basic things like that. And I would, I think it helps the life of the MSP to be easier as well, if they can get those practices in place and hopefully have fewer alerts to deal with.
Right, right. Yeah. Now, I guess the other question that I have about this is, where do you think this misalignment of expectations is coming from? What do you think is the reason why, this happens so much?
That's a good question. I think for the small businesses, they tend to just think, okay, I've got an MSP, they're watching. I don't need to worry about it. I can just do whatever. But that's not the case, right? You still have to let people know, don't click on links that come in from outside the company unless you are sure this is somebody you're expecting to communicate with. I think MSPs need to help manage that expectation of, it's a shared responsibility model, essentially, to take something
Right.
from the cloud environment that you hear so often in the cloud. Everybody has a part to play. Everybody's responsible. And
Right.
everybody needs to do their part to help improve the security posture.
Right. Right. I think one part of this I think, MSPs probably should get better at this, is not to be very specific about what they are doing, but also what they are not doing, right? Like of course, there's a contractual part of things, and I'm sure they have their contracts figured out so that it's clear, but there's no question about what's actually happening on the contract.
Right.
The issue is the knowledge, right? The issue is, when you're hiring an MSP or an MSSP, both those situations, more likely than not, that you don't actually really know what's happening. You need someone to guide you through the process, and addressing those things that they don't do. It's something that could potentially help, right?
Right.
So thinking about priorities, it's a big topic for me, at least. What do you think companies should master first? Should it be prevention or response?
Whoa. I think you got to focus on prevention. Yeah, I'm going to go with prevention. Put the deadbolt lock on the front door, and then and then get the security monitoring tied into a reputable company that can respond, or something along those lines,
Right.
I guess, so to speak, to use a terrible metaphor. I think prevention first. Figure out, what are you securing, what are your assets, and what's the most important things to secure first. And then
No, I
hopefully
think
don't have anything to respond to until you're ready to.
right. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a perfectly appropriate metaphor. Like there's no point, and it's a good idea to kind of like do those basic things to prevent things from happening first, and then worry about what happens if. On this line, we talked about the people, process, technology piece. A slightly different perspective. Cyber education is an important aspect of cybersecurity. If you had to, again, in terms of priorities, say which should take a lead in strengthening defenses of companies, would you say it's more so cyber education or more so the tech?
Say education. Again, it's the people and the awareness, and don't click on these things. Know what you're responding to, or make sure it's expected, and don't be afraid to speak up. If you're not sure, just ask somebody. It's okay to ask, right? And I'm fortunate to be at an organization where people feel comfortable to do that, and they do, and it helps tremendously.
Okay. That's interesting, actually. I think a lot of the times what I meet, talking to, it's a funny question that I sort of comes sort of next in my mind is, have you actually experienced a functional cyber education program that actually worked, right? So it's not about just having it in place and doing it, but it's also about, is it actually doing what you want it to do, right? And
Right.
I think interestingly enough, the answer to that, in my experience, a lot of the times is, well, actually not really. But it's interesting to hear your experience, which is, it is possible to do it in a way that people are actively engaged and they do feel comfortable to actually speak up, basically, right?
Right. And maybe that is easier in a smaller organization where there's this familiarity with the people you work with, and at all various levels of the org chart. But yes, absolutely foster that environment, that it's okay to speak up, it's okay to ask questions. And especially if you're not sure, just take a moment, step back and pause and find out. Ask somebody. Yeah, because sometimes Outlook or those other tools, they let stuff through. So just ask if you're not sure.
Speaking about things getting through, ransomware is a huge topic these days.
Mm-hmm.
It's I guess changed from something that was sort of an interesting topic a few years ago, and now it's really taken a big chunk of what's actually happening in practice. Would you say, to battle ransomware and to make sure that it's not as feasible for adversaries to go down this route, is it more important to innovate and find new technologies to prevent these sort of events, or is it more about using the legacy tech, let's say, or the tech we already have and have had for some time, and putting them to practice better?
Yeah, I think the legacy tech goes a long way. Have multiple backups and have some in different places that are segregated from each other so that ransomware can't necessarily spread to everywhere you have backups. Gosh, I'm going to age myself a little bit here, but I remember back in the day, one of my earlier jobs, even though I was a software developer at the time, I was like, what's going on with our backups? And, what would happen if the building just burns down tomorrow? Like, well, I guess all the backups are here in the building. That's probably not a good thing. That's a great idea, Jeff. Why don't you go to the bank and we'll open up a security deposit box and you can run the backups over once a week and put some backups in there. So, no good deed goes unpunished, I suppose. But but we had it there, just in case the worst happened.
Mm-hmm. Right. So in case something like that does happen, or maybe it doesn't have to be a ransomware event, but if in case there's a breach, would you say should bear the cost of the breach? Should it be, I guess this is a twofold question, the MSP / the MSSP, which is the other sort of variation to this, or should it be the customer?
I think ultimately it's going to fall on the customer.
Mm.
It's probably, depends. Of course, there's going to be lots of it depends in a situation like this, but, was an employee click on something they shouldn't have, or did the customer not keep things updated? Were they missing an update with a known vulnerability? But then certainly if the MSSP missed an alert, and maybe for some reason it got by them or they didn't inform the customer for, 72 hours or 5 days or whatever it happens to be, then sure, then I would say they probably bear some responsibility in that. I think ultimately, even when MSP does their thing, right? If the customer didn't do something, it's going to fall on the customer. Yeah. If I'm driving around my car and it goes from summer to winter and I haven't checked the air pressure in my tires and then something bad happens with a tire, it's not the tire manufacturer, it's not the mechanic, right? I should know, got to check that tire pressure frequently.
Right. You say there's a difference here. I mean, that's why I sort of put it sort of there's those two variations. Would you say that there's a difference between an MSP and an MSSP in this regard? In terms of, I have seen, some it's also there's different MSSPs also have different business models and do it differently, right? I think the one extreme that I have seen is that an MSSP actually sort of serves sort of as an insurer, I would say, or they present themselves that way actually. And they would say, you know what, if you actually do everything we say and you do it exactly the way we say, then we're just going to cover the cost. And they actually have that contractually agreed upon, right? And I think that's interesting, but it's not a very common thing, honestly. It's not a very common.
Yeah, I don't believe I've ever encountered that. That is interesting and might be something worth exploring. And I wonder, what does having that security blanket do for the price? How affordable is it still after something like that?
Doing that. Yeah, of course. Yeah. And also, I guess from the other part of things is, the other side of things is how much of the risk is still there, like what even if they do everything right, is there still a way to screw up? And then who's actually responsible for that in that case? But maybe it's the cost or the pricing and the risk management perspective that the MSSP is doing, that they do it at a price point that, and I honestly couldn't tell you.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's so many ways things can go wrong. A 0 day that nobody knows about. Who knows, right? It's just tough. It's just tough all around. But, do everything you can. Do the things you're supposed to do.
So coming back to ransomware for a little bit, if it happens, should the company pay or not, in your opinion?
I will absolutely fall on the side of do not pay. I will die on that hill, so to speak. Just when you pay, then you're validating that it's works and it makes money. It's just going to continue. Yeah. Don't pay.
Do not pay, do not pay, do not pay.
Yeah. And there's no guarantee, right? There's no guarantee that their encryption or decryption keys will work, or that they'll give them to you, or that they won't be back in a month because you paid the first time. And it's like, well, they'll pay again then. And I firmly believe don't pay.
I forget the number, but it's a staggering number of cases when even after payment, the decryption keys don't actually work.
Right.
Because they honestly may not even have them. Like, it could be a lot of different situations because they don't care. They care about the money.
Exactly. Right.
And the problem is the way that happens, you first have to pay and then you get something that will maybe work, right?
And I'm going to do like a little Cyber Oinks flipperoo here on you. Do you think there should be regulation to prohibit paying for ransomware?
I think that's absolutely a very, very good idea.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, this is a typical, let's say, game theory problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the individual company, especially if they don't have the full knowledge of the situation, they are motivated to pay because the whole idea and the way the price of the decryption key is set so that it pays off for you to use the key instead of actually solving the problems in some other way.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So you as an individual aren't really that well motivated, it seems at first glance, to not pay. But
right.
By doing so, you're making it things that worse for everyone else or for the whole group.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think this is one of those things where regulation, and honestly, even just thinking about cybersecurity, I'm not sold that it's necessary to have regulation evolve in a lot of the places when it comes to cybersecurity, but this is definitely one of them that actually would have an enormously positive impact, I think.
I agree.
So passwords, this is a topic.
All right.
close to my heart. Specifically, well, this is about password policies actually, and the question is, because let me give you a bit of a context. There are two different standards that NIST has separately, basically talking about password policies. One of them basically says you have to change the password. The password has to be yay long, and you have to change it every so often. The other one says the password has to be yay long, and you never change it, and you must never change it.
Yeah, and that's the one from NIST I'm familiar with. I'm not familiar with where they still say change it every so often. Although I guess they do in FedRAMP for like encryption keys and
things. It's I forget the number, but it's actually the digital identity guidelines that have different levels of assurance and actually go into, I guess the question is, which way do you think is actually the right way of doing things or the better way of doing things?
So my understanding has always been the length of the password is what really matters, making it a strong password. And so therefore, you don't necessarily need to be doing these complex rules about you have to have so many uppercase letters and so many symbols and numbers and this and that. It's more about make the password be at least 12 characters or longer. And, and I fall on this side of what I've read is don't arbitrarily change the password unless you have a reason to think that it needs to be changed. It's been compromised in some way. But I know there's still, gosh, you see it all the time, companies that still require these complex password rules. And, even in FedRAMP, every assessment, it's like, well, this says this. Well, FedRAMP's not there yet. You have to change your password every so often and this and that. And like, okay. So yeah, I think for those out there making products that deal with passwords and authentication, make it configurable. Let the customer decide how
Right.
complex they want their rules to be and how often the password has to be changed.
So I think the reason, this is a topic that I'm intimately familiar with. Of course, I don't know the motivation behind exactly what the motivation behind could be by different authors. But I guess if I think about cryptography, for example, cryptography typically has, and some of the fundamental concepts behind cryptography is that every key has an expiry date.
Mm-hmm.
Because the whole point of cryptography, and also passwords, by the way, that's why I'm talking about it, is that it's using the mechanism of secret. You're always working with a secret to achieve something, and that something only works as long as the secret actually stays secret. And that's why you have expiry dates. There's two reasons really. One reason is because with time and Moore's law, computation power increasing still, surprisingly,
Right.
no one expected that. You have uh, an increasing chance of the secret being compromised just based on brute force computation, basically, on the one hand. And the other thing is, with the secret being out there somewhere for a longer time, you have more the likelihood of the secret actually being compromised also increases, right? So the reason why I'm talking about this is I think there's some reason to the password. I think that's what's really sitting and what was sitting behind the idea of frequently changing passwords, right? Or at some point in time changing
Right.
passwords. Especially if you have a situation where what you can't really control is someone, you provide a password, let's say, or they create a password for your organization's Outlook or whatever, right? What's going to stop them from using that password in another system when they're signing up for Amazon Prime or whatever, right? Like,
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's where, encourage and this even mentions this in their documentation, encourage the use of password managers so that staff will be less likely to use a password in multiple sites. And a lot of times when you buy for the company, for your organization, those password managers, they will give a personal license to the employees, like a personal family license. So I think that goes a long way to encouraging taking what we're trying to teach you and use it in your personal life and be more secure in your personal life as well. And I think that kind of goes a long way.
yeah, absolutely.
So you fall on the side of changing the password regularly?
Well, I fall on the side of not using passwords at all.
Well, yeah, that's true. Indeed.
I don't have to answer the question. I honestly, I think I think both have their, even with the password manager, and I think, partially that is reflected in in sort of the newer ways of approaching things, I guess, is a lot of the times people don't actually remember the passwords. They are using password managers. And on that note, I think the issue that I have or I see with password manager is it's a centralized way to store something that's a lot of sensitive information, basically. Let's put it that way, right? Like it's a
Sure.
very, 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 very risky business, in my opinion. And it's proven to not work out so well, right?
Yeah, there's some companies out there that had some issues, no doubt.
There's a few names we're not going to name, yeah. And that's just how it is, right? And then it's a sort of there's still a lot of this, a lot of theory that I guess it's will work out slightly better if you try it that way, and then maybe for some time it will, and then until it doesn't, right? That's sort of, so that's why I'm on the pastoralist side.
Right. I get it. Yeah. there's no doubt there's risks there as well. Having them all in the central location, do what you can, research the company, see how they're encrypting your credentials, and are they able to decrypt them themselves, or is the customer the only person that can decrypt the password vault, so to speak? But how about security questions, though? I think, can we all agree that it's time for the security questions to go away about what street I grew up on and my mother's maiden name or this and that could be used to unlock other accounts?
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, just talking about this is a huge, in my opinion, this is a huge topic in the passwordless space as well, because but I've seen different things. I follow different methods of doing passwordless, and it's a hard topic because so often it actually comes down to a password at some point anyway. It's like, okay, there's this really robust passwordless way to do things, but then when you come to recovery, because like honestly, it is harder to do passwordless just because it is device bound, right? And you need to have good recovery situations, right? You need to be able to say, okay, what happens when you lose the device or whatever, right? Now, in those situations, the last thing I think you want to do is reduce it to what you were saying, the security questions or password. But unfortunately, that's kind of what's happening, I think, which is I see that as an evasion tactic, honestly, to say we're going to change things slightly so that you're not directly aiming at the target at this very moment, because a lot of the tools that are used in phishing campaigns they're actually tools. They're not systems that hackers build themselves. They're systems that they use, basically, right? They download an open source project that does this and that, and then they just deploy it and use it, right? So
yeah, indeed. Yeah, you have to be careful with everything out there. Nothing's guaranteed safe, hardly, it seems like.
Yep. So on the password topic, the one I kind of touched on this already, but if it happens that you have a user, whatever password policy they have, they take the password and they use it on some other website, but that website gets hacked, let's say, or they just get caught, they get caught in a phishing campaign or something, and they expose the credential that way. That then leads to your organization being, being hacked, let's say. So, who's that fall in this situation, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, obviously, hopefully you've been doing awareness training and encouraging people to not reuse passwords. And I think the employee does bear some responsibility. If they use that same password out on the site that got exposed, and who knows, maybe they're even using their work email address as the user ID, which that's not great either.
Yep. And even if they didn't, it's not hard to find, right? Like it's sometimes not that hard to match.
But what do you do? So I mean, do you fire the employee for this? Obviously you need to be some more awareness training and make an emphasis on that particular point, not just for that person, but for the whole company. Make sure people get it. But so do you fire the person? I would fall on the side that, well, I've already spent a lot of money to train them. Right. And they make a big mistake. I've spent a lot of money to train them on not doing that mistake again, so to speak, right? To help to lead to a breach. Do I want to give up and sort of lose what I've invested, or say, okay, I'll let this, this one big mistake is okay, but can't ever happen again. I think that's probably
right. I think that's also probably a lot about the company culture. I would, and the relationships, I guess. But on the other hand, is that important? It is a policy for a reason. Right. It is important. I think honestly, in some situations, and some companies would even consider more drastic measures than just firing the person. If there's like that could also be to say, well, you know what, we put these things here for a reason, and it wasn't just an incident, it was a breach, and it cost us a lot of money. Company may go out of business because of it, but that's not uncommon for
True.
smaller businesses, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then in that situation, it becomes a bit more serious even than really a question of, is the person going to continue working with us or not, or it actually can become a question of, okay, well, there's this huge financial problem being created because of this. Who's actually going to, take the fall? And if they have been trained, then
Yeah, true. Hopefully you've done the training, and doesn't
but
always work.
But it's a hard question, because it's also
Yeah.
on the other hand, are people perfect? People are
Right.
kind of supposed to click on links, like that's kind of the whole point of links. They're supposed to do
Yeah.
things, right?
Yeah.
Someone else was just telling
Yeah.
me the other day, like, what did they get fired for not opening a file because it had something really important that needed to happen? You know what I mean? Like and it's, especially with AI, like, is it going to be easy to recognize what's real or what isn't real? People don't have a crystal ball, right?
Yeah. I had a friend that was asking me some cybersecurity questions, and so I emailed him some things, and he's like, and he pointed out the ironies. I shouldn't click on these. It's like, yeah, you probably shouldn't. You're probably not supposed to. But yeah, if we can't click on links, how do we get any work done? Right? We still have to
I'm going to
communicate
use
with
that
people
for.
outside our organization.
I like that idea. I'm going to use this for some. I'm going to use this for something.
Yeah.
Send people a link and say they can't open it.
Yeah.
All right, I have two
Or what
more
I liked was
questions.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I was just saying I was at a conference one time, and at the end of the talk about awareness training and this and that, he puts a QR code on the last slide. Go to this link, and I'll send you my new book that's about to be published. And so
Mhm.
everybody in the room's picking up their phone, scanning the QR code, and then of course the webpage says, "Why would you trust me? Why did you do this?" Right? And so
Oh,
here we are, a room
that's
full of
great.
cyber professionals. Right? We got duped into it.
Well, yeah, that's funny. Two more questions. It's more focused on trends this time around. Zero trust architecture, has been around for some time now. A huge topic for the cybersecurity community. My question to you is: do you feel that zero trust is, to you, more of a buzzword and something that isn't really bringing anything that new to the table, or is it something that's a really significant strategy, would you say, for cybersecurity going forward? And just
Yeah,
maybe
I think
take out the compliance,
yeah,
part of things out of this, yeah, because that sort of
yeah,
takes the fun out of
it's a whole different beast. Yeah.
it.
No, I think zero trust is, a bit of a game changer in a sense. You know, don't trust. There's a tradition in cybersecurity of once they're connected to the VPN and they're behind the firewall, so to speak, then okay. I gotta watch stuff trying to get in and not watch as much inside. But I think zero trust says, okay, no, we should watch everything. And so I tend to lean on, zero trust, I think, is a positive thing, especially in organizations that are going to work remotely. And it's hard to specify what that boundary is when you have people in potentially multiple countries, even different time zones, and all accessing corporate assets. So I tend to see it as a good thing. I know it's kind of turned into a marketing term, and different definitions of what zero trust means, kind of like with AI. Is
Mhm.
all these products AI, or is it maybe just machine learning?
Right.
So that's kind of where I fall.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you
I
think,
actually
Connor?
have one other thing that comes to mind, which is, what's your take on sort of I guess, a relationship, or how are these two topics connected? One being zero trust, and the other one, which we talked about a bit earlier, managing devices and the whole problem of risk associated with the endpoints and devices, right? How do those two fit together in your mind?
Well, I think it's pretty closely related in a sense because, I kind of want things like this programmer, I know lives in, this state. We'll pick Oregon or Ohio or something like that. I want to know if that device or those credentials are ever used from Europe somewhere or Africa or China. That's something I want to know about. I think where in the past, we didn't maybe look at those sorts of details. It was just, okay, the device authenticated.
Mm-hmm.
This is this person, and they're allowed to access these things always. But, I think we should look at, okay, it's, 2 a.m. where this person lives. They're probably not working. I hope they're not working at 2 a.m.
This is interesting. So do you think is zero trust more important now than it was before? And are the detail, let's say, that you're talking about, more important today than it was before? Is it more so because of the complexity of attacks and the number of attacks and just the sheer volume of everything that's going on from a threat perspective? Or, and it doesn't have to be either or, right? Like, is it how cloud basically has transformed the way services are used?
Right.
Which one would you say it's more, I guess, is the question to you?
Yeah, I think it's definitely cloud. But then also when COVID came along and people were sent home and sent outside the office, I think the traditional office setting corporations were struggling, right? It was kind of a shock. Whereas, if you were a smaller business where everybody was already working remotely, then you're used to that and you kind of put your security around that mindset of, I don't really have the notion of a corporate network per se, as I've got mobile devices spread all around the country and a cloud environment that is not my own. It's, an Amazon data center somewhere, and they're responsible for this physical security and sort of behind their wall, so to speak. Yeah, it got complicated, but I think we're finding our way.
Mm-hmm. Yep. The other topic of interest, of course, is AI. And I guess you said, like, what's AI, what's machine learning? That just like in any other industry, there's a lot of AI being thrown around as a term that's to cure it all. But there's a lot of stuff happening sort of on the that's more visible, I guess, to the regular Joe, and it has more to do with images being generated and text being generated. It seems like a person wrote it and stuff like that. My question from the cybersecurity perspective: do you think that these kind of tools, or let me maybe rephrase it, do you think that adversaries will benefit more from these kind of tools than cybersecurity vendors and companies will benefit from the innovation that's happening on that cybersecurity front?
Unfortunately, I think I do feel that. They'll take the guardrails off and they'll move quickly without regard for harm or negative impact, of course. So I hate to be pessimistic, but I think so.
And so where do you see the risks specifically? If it's is it more of a general, because there's definitely an aspect to this where it's a race, right? It's really about who's going to get there quicker, and then not really that much worry about should we even be getting there. And that's the state of state of this industry. It's not just the market, but it's also geopolitical, right? Like it's not just market being interested in this happening this way, but it's also countries, whole states being interested in doing it this way, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think they'll absolutely use it to try and identify people within organizations much more quickly that can be targeted for social engineering, even designing the social engineering attacks. I think
Mhm.
I think it's gonna get worse before it gets better.
Yeah. So but I guess the reason why I was asking is, do you think it's going to be the tools that are sort of out there available to everyone that are going to be used for things that are maybe not so, that are going to be misused by adversaries? Or is it more that you think there's going to be other tools that are going to be created that are maybe totally unrelated to, text and images, let's say, and video and voice and stuff like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've seen experiments where um, somebody had like an AI generated video of themselves on a meeting,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
there are several people, and like the one human on the meeting didn't realize that they were talking with several AI generated videos. Yeah, and I think the bad guys will take these tools and they will adapt them and modify them to meet their needs and do the things they're trying to do. Like we're all sort of doing with AI these days, is how can it make lives easier and more efficient and get more done more quickly? And I think they'll use it for the exact same reasons.
Well, I think a really good example of this is how there's a big problem for universities and just education in general. Um,
Yeah.
you have assignments and essays, and the point of them a lot of the time is really for the person to actually go through the process of writing that essay, right? It's not so much
Right.
about the final result. It in itself usually isn't that valuable at all to anyone, really, right? But it's about
Yeah.
getting exposed to the process and actually evolving the ability to express thought in a written manner and in a structured way, right? And reflecting on that. And it really is a form of it's not the intended use, right? It's not supposed to be
Right.
just written without. So yeah. So
Yeah. If students are using AI to generate their papers, how's that going to affect society in the long term? What's the education level really going to end up being for us humans?
it's going to have to change dramatically the way education works, I
Yeah,
think.
I do too.
Hopefully universities are ready to adapt quickly.
Yeah.
Before we wrap things up, Jeff, I want to ask,
Okay.
could you give one advice to maybe, let's say, owners of SMBs and people running SMBs to help them prioritize how they think about cybersecurity and there was like one thing they could take away to say, okay, this is maybe the thing that I should do. This is how I should think about cybersecurity. What would that be in your mind?
Yeah, I think two things for small, medium business is, you know, don't turn off automatic updates. Let things get updated. I know sometimes things go wrong, but if you don't update, you're using stuff with published vulnerabilities that often have examples of how to be exploited posted on the internet. Just just take the chance. I know there's CrowdStrike and all that stuff, but things go wrong, but it's not all that often. Use automatic updates, and then use multi-factor authentication whenever it's offered as an option for whatever services you're using. Take advantage of the security being provided by the tools and vendors that you use.
Mhm.
I would start with those two things first and go from there.
Yeah, great 2 points. Thanks so much. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
Also, it's time to wrap things up.
Man,
It's for
this was really
it's
fun. I enjoyed this.
great. Yeah, me too. It's a great conversation, by the way. We were doing 12 questions today. Um, but there's going to be other concepts that we're going to be coming up with Cyber Oinks. So I'm looking
Okay.
forward to other conversations that we're going to have in the future.
Absolutely.
Great. It was great having you. Thanks so much for joining me for the discussion today. For anyone else listening, thanks so much for tuning in. Make sure to subscribe and follow us for future podcast sessions. And see you later, Jeff.
All right. Thank you so much and much success. Appreciate everything.
Thank you. Bye.